penthouse at the top of Seoul's most prestigious building was a fortress, cold, sleek, and clinical. The black-tinted windows revealed the sprawling city below, but inside there was nothing but silence. No laughter, no warmth, only the hum of the city's distant noise and the rhythmic tapping of Jinwoo's fingers against the glass desk before him. Jinwoo Kang, the feared leader of the Korean Mafia, was a man of power and influence. But even with his wealth, his empire, and his army of loyal men, he was, in his own words, nothing but a shell, a walking corpse. For the past 3 years, his body had betrayed him. A poison, a toxin administered by his closest ally, or perhaps his enemy, had rendered him incapable of feeling, emotionally dead, physically impotent. There was nothing, no sensation, not the thrill of control, not the rush of power, not the pleasure of a woman's touch. His body was a prison, and no matter how hard he tried, there was no escape. He could command armies, make men tremble in fear, but when it came to his own desires, his own needs, he was powerless. Jinwoo stared out of the window, his gaze distant, his heart colder than the steel and glass that surrounded him. His life was a carefully orchestrated dance, a routine of power plays, meetings, and alliances. But none of it mattered anymore. None of it could fill the void inside him. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The poison had taken everything from him, his vitality, his sense of self. The doctors had told him it was permanent. His enemies whispered behind his back that he wasn't a man anymore, that he was a shadow of his former self. And they were right. He had accepted that. But even in his numbness, there were rules, there were expectations. The Mafia elders were growing restless. They demanded a successor, an heir. Without it, his empire, his legacy, everything he had worked for, would crumble. Jinwoo's fist clenched, the only sign of life in his cold body. I can't let them win. The door to his office clicked open, and Hyunho, his most trusted ally, stepped in. His face was tight, clearly uncomfortable. He was one of the few who saw through Jinwoo's ice-cold facade, who knew that beneath the hardened exterior was a man slowly losing his will to fight. "Boss," Hyunho said cautiously, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting danger. "The elders are calling for a meeting. They're demanding a successor." Jinwoo didn't respond at first. He didn't need to. The weight of the situation pressed on him like a vice. "You know what they want," Hyunho continued, lowering his voice. "Without an heir, they'll give it all to Min-seok." Jinwoo's jaw tightened at the mention of his cousin. Min-seok was a snake, power-hungry, ambitious, and ruthless. The last thing Jinwoo wanted was to see his empire fall into his hands. But the truth remained. He couldn't produce an heir. His body wouldn't let him. His thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of his phone. A text message. "Happy 35th birthday, cousin." This was just a warning. Jinwoo's stomach twisted. "Min-seok." The message was accompanied by a photo of a champagne glass shattered on the floor, the shards of crystal reflecting the blood-red light of a sniper's laser sight. A warning. But Jinwoo didn't flinch. He had been through worse. "Boss," Hyunho's voice broke through his thoughts. "There's one more thing. Your housekeeper, Mrs. Park, she's in the hospital, pneumonia. The agency is sending a replacement nurse tomorrow." Jinwoo waved him off. Another nurse? Another face in the background of his sterile life? He didn't need anyone. Not now. Not ever. Hyunho hesitated before speaking again. "You don't think—" "No," Jinwoo said, his voice sharp. "I'm fine. Leave me alone." With that, Hyunho left, closing the door behind him. Jinwoo stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. The empire he had built felt fragile now, like glass ready to shatter. What's the point? He thought bitterly. Power without feeling is nothing. Across the city, in a small, dimly lit apartment in Itaewon, Ada Okonkwo sat on her bed, staring at her phone. Her mind raced with thoughts of the past, her former fiancé Laurent, and the life she had left behind in Paris. She had made the difficult decision to move to Seoul to start over. New city, new identity, new future. But the message she had just received was not the future she had imagined. Laurent is getting married. Thought you should know. Ada set her phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She had known this moment would come, the day Laurent moved on. But that didn't make it any easier. She had spent years putting herself first, her career, her nursing career over relationships, and Laurent had never understood that. Well, he's happy now, she thought, but the bitter taste of betrayal lingered. She stood and walked to the small kitchen, opening the fridge and grabbing the water bottle she'd left there earlier. The sound of her phone buzzing stopped her in her tracks. High priority assignment, wealthy client, private care. The message went on to offer an absurdly high salary, 50 million won per month. The client was none other than Kang Jin-woo, the name whispered in hushed tones at the hospital. The man who controlled Seoul's underground world, the infamous Mafia boss. Ada's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the rumours, of course. Jin-woo was an enigma, untouchable, cold, dangerous, and yet here she was, facing the decision of whether to accept the offer. She hesitated. This could be the fresh start she was looking for. And the money. Well, the money was too tempting to refuse. Ada tapped the accept button, not knowing that this decision would change everything. The next morning, Ada found herself standing outside Kang Jin-woo's penthouse, the towering black glass building that pierced the sky. The security was tighter than anything she had ever seen. Cameras followed her every step as she entered the building. She swallowed her nerves, straightened her scrubs, and stepped into the elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity. Each second, her heart raced faster. The elevator doors opened onto the sprawling penthouse, which was as cold and empty as the man who lived there. Jin-woo sat at a massive desk, his back to her as he overlooked the city below. "You're the nurse," he said without turning, his voice flat, almost indifferent. Ada paused, her pulse quickening. The rumours were true. He was as cold as they said. "And you're the patient," she replied, her tone firm. "Shall we begin, or would you prefer to continue ignoring me?" For a brief moment, Jin-woo's shoulders tensed. He didn't flinch, he didn't react. But something in his eyes, something fleeting and raw, made Ada feel as if she had just stirred a sleeping beast. Ada moved closer to check his vitals, her hand steady and practiced. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, but when she reached for his wrist to check his pulse, something unexpected happened. As her fingers brushed against his skin, Jin-woo's breath hitched. He jerked back so suddenly that the blood pressure cuff fell to the floor with a sharp clatter. Ada stood frozen, her mind racing. What the hell just happened? Jin-woo's face was pale, his eyes wide, filled with something, fear, confusion, desperation. He pressed a hand to his chest, breathing unevenly, as if the air had been knocked out of him. "What did you do?" His voice cracked. Ada stepped back, unsure whether she should call a doctor. "I just checked your pulse. Are you okay? Should I—" "No," Jin-woo cut her off sharply. "No, doctors." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an urgency that stunned her. He stumbled back, his body shaking slightly as if fighting some invisible force. Ada stood there, her heart racing, confused and more than a little worried. But she didn't press. She picked up the cuff and quickly left the room. all the while wondering what had just transpired. The days that followed felt like a strange, surreal dance. Every morning at 8:00 a.m., Ada arrived at the penthouse, and every morning Jinwoo was already awake, sitting at his desk staring at the city below him with a cold, calculated gaze. The elevator ride up was always the same, silent, tense, and filled with the growing anticipation that neither of them could quite name. She never knew what to expect when she stepped into that sterile, monochrome space. Sometimes he was the cold, unreachable Mafia king, locked in his own world of power and isolation. Other times, she saw glimpses of the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. But those moments were fleeting, like cracks in ice that threatened to break open, only to be sealed again just as quickly. Jinwoo never spoke much. The few words he did say were clipped, professional, and cold. He made no effort to engage with her beyond what was necessary for her to do her job. But every time she touched him, checked his vitals, measured his pulse, there was that reaction, that shock, that electricity that surged through his body in a way that rattled both of them. Ada noticed it. She noticed the subtle tension in his posture whenever she approached, the way his breath would catch the moment her fingers brushed his skin, the way his eyes would momentarily lose their steely, icy composure, revealing something else, something human. But she wasn't stupid. She had worked with enough high-profile clients to know when she was crossing a line, and yet she couldn't stop herself. There was something about Jinwoo, his vulnerability, his haunted expression, the broken man beneath the king, that stirred something in her, something she thought she had buried long ago. It was on the 6th day that everything shifted. That morning, as Ada checked Jinwoo's blood pressure, the usual tension filled the air. She wrapped the cuff around his arm, the routine steady and methodical. But when she reached for his wrist, something in the air changed. It wasn't the same as before. This time Jinwoo didn't pull away. He didn't flinch. He froze. And the moment her fingers touched his skin, the world seemed to stop. She felt it. The heat radiating from him, the sudden, sharp intake of breath that left him gasping. His pulse quickened, and his fingers twitched as if he was fighting against something he couldn't control. Her hand lingered, her pulse quickening in response to his. It was almost as if time itself slowed. Jinwoo's eyes shot to hers, the familiar coldness replaced by something far more dangerous. Desire. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Stop. The word was like a command, a plea, but Ada couldn't move. She was caught in the gaze of a man who had buried his feelings for so long that now they were exploding in front of her. She slowly pulled her hand away, the space between them charged with a tension neither could deny. Jinwoo started, his words failing him. He cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. Don't touch me. Ada stepped back, confused and unnerved by the reaction she had caused. I didn't mean to... But Jinwoo had already turned his back to her, looking out the window, his shoulders stiff. His voice was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath it. You don't understand. Over the next few days, the dynamic between them changed. It was subtle at first. Small glances, lingering touches, unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The tension between them was palpable. But no matter how many times their eyes met, no matter how often their fingers brushed, neither of them spoke about what was happening. And yet, the unspoken pull was undeniable. 3 days later, Jinwoo summoned her again, his voice colder than usual when he called her to his office. When she arrived, he was standing by the window, his usual posture of controlled power restored. But there was something different in his eyes, something more vulnerable. Ada entered the room, but this time she didn't speak. She simply waited for him to address her. I need to know what's happening to me. Jinwoo's voice was tight, strained with emotion he refused to show. He turned to her, the ice in his eyes softened, replaced with something more human. Ada was taken aback by the rawness of his request. She hadn't expected this. Not from the man who had seemed incapable of feeling anything for so long. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully, though her heart was pounding in her chest. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability in him that he had worked so hard to bury. I can't stop it," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "Every time you touch me, it's like my body comes alive. Like I'm breaking free from some prison I've been trapped in. I haven't felt anything for 3 years. And now, I can't control it." His words hit her like a wave, and for the first time, Ada saw the true extent of his struggle. Jinwoo wasn't just a mafia king. He wasn't just a man in power. He was a man who had been broken, physically, emotionally, and now, for the first time in years, something was waking inside of him. She stepped closer, her heart aching for him. She didn't know how to fix him. She didn't know if she even could, but she understood the weight of his confession. Jinwoo, I didn't mean to..." But he interrupted her. "Stop calling me that." Ada blinked, confused. "What?" "Jinwoo," he said, as if the name felt foreign on his tongue. "You can't keep calling me that. Not anymore." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "What do you want me to call you, then?" Jinwoo's gaze was intense, locking onto her. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, was growing smaller by the second. "Call me alive." The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise. He wasn't just asking her to save him from his numbness. He was asking her to see him. The real him. The broken man who had been struggling in silence for so long. Ada's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected this, to be the one who awakened something in him. She had never expected to care about a man like him. But now, looking into his eyes, she realized how far they had already come, how far they would go. There was no going back. The moment they crossed this line, everything would change, and neither of them was ready for what would happen next. The following week, the tension between them reached its peak. Each touch, each glance, each word was loaded with so much emotion and unspoken desire that it was becoming impossible to ignore. The professional boundaries they had carefully set up between them were crumbling. They were falling, slowly, together. But at what cost? The next few days felt like a slow, inevitable descent into something neither Ada nor Jinwoo was ready for. It was as though the universe had conspired to bring them together, only to push them further apart, each touch they shared laced with the weight of their unspoken desires. Each time Ada stepped into Jinwoo's penthouse, the tension was almost unbearable. He no longer greeted her with the cold indifference he once did. Now his eyes followed her every movement, the unspoken attraction between them simmering just beneath the surface. But neither of them acknowledged it. Not yet. Ada found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way his jaw would tighten when their eyes met, how his hands would clench when she was near. And each time they interacted, that spark, that electric touch, lingered long after she pulled away. But the lines between them remained blurred. She was his nurse, his caretaker. He had hired her to keep him alive, but she hadn't signed up for this. Jinwoo, for his part, struggled to understand what was happening. He had spent the last 3 years closing himself off to any form of connection. Now, with each touch from Ada, something inside him came alive. It was as if she was the antidote to the poison that had taken everything from him. And yet, the more alive he felt, the more terrified he became. The morning of the 7th day, when Ada entered the penthouse, she immediately sensed that something was different. The usual coldness in Jinwoo's posture had shifted, replaced by an almost palpable restlessness. He was standing by the window again, but this time he wasn't looking at the city. He was staring at the floor, his back turned to her as she approached. "Jinwoo," Ada called softly, her voice breaking the silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward her slowly, his gaze locking with hers. It was a gaze she had never seen before, a gaze that held something deeper than the icy facade he normally wore. It was raw, vulnerable, desperate. "I can't stop thinking about it," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Thinking about what?" Ada asked, her heart pounding. "You." His voice cracked slightly as he said it, a rare admission of weakness. "Every time you touch me, I feel alive. I feel things I thought were gone forever." Ada's breath caught in her throat. The confession was both unexpected and overwhelming. She hadn't realized just how much her presence had affected him. But she also felt something in herself stir, a deep, gnawing desire she had tried so hard to suppress. She was here to do a job. She wasn't supposed to fall for him, not for a man like him. But as the days wore on, it became harder to ignore the pull between them. "You don't have to feel this way," she said softly, taking a step forward. Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes now. "I'm just here to help you, to do my job. And what if this feeling isn't just about you helping me?" Jinwoo's gaze never wavered. "What if it's more than that?" The question hung in the air between them. Ada swallowed hard. She didn't have an answer. How could she? Everything about this situation was wrong. So many boundaries had been crossed already, so many lines blurred. She was his nurse, and yet she was standing here, staring into the eyes of a man who was both broken and whole at the same time. She wanted to walk away, to leave, to stop the madness. But something in her heart, something deeper than reason, wouldn't let her. "Jinwoo," she said, her voice softer now, "you've been through so much. You've been broken for so long. I'm just a nurse, a stranger. You're not in a place where you can make these kinds of decisions." He took a step closer to her, his eyes dark and intense. "And what if I am?" Ada's pulse quickened. The air between them crackled with tension, and she could feel the magnetic pull of his presence. There was no going back now. They had crossed a line, and neither of them was willing to step away. Before she could respond, Jinwoo reached out, his hand cupping her cheek gently. His touch was warm, the opposite of the coldness that usually defined him. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, and Ada's breath hitched at the contact. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside the penthouse seemed to disappear. There was only Jinwoo and Ada caught in the storm of their own emotions. And then, in one fluid motion, Jinwoo leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't slow. It was desperate, hungry, as though he was starved for the very thing he had denied himself for so long. His lips crashed against hers, and Ada's body reacted before her mind could process the moment. She kissed him back, fiercely, her hands threading through his hair as she pulled him closer. The kiss was everything, raw, intense, and electric. It was the culmination of all the emotions they had been hiding from each other, the physical need that had been building since the moment their fingers first touched. When they pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, neither of them knew what had just happened. But they both knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of something neither of them could control. The days that followed were a blur. Ada continued her work as Jinwoo's nurse, but the professional boundaries that had once defined their relationship were no longer there. The sexual tension between them was impossible to ignore. Each touch, each interaction, was charged with an intensity that left them both on edge. But something had changed. Ada could feel it. So could Jinwoo. They were no longer just patient and nurse. They were something else, something dangerous, something fragile. And though they tried to keep it professional, every interaction seemed to push them further into a world neither of them was ready to navigate. One night, just as Ada was about to leave for the day, Jinwoo stopped her at the door. He was standing in the doorway to his office, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Ada," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I need you to stay, please." She turned to face him, confusion written on her face. "Stay? I can't do this alone anymore." His voice was rough, vulnerable, in a way she hadn't seen before. "I don't want to be alone." Ada hesitated. She had already allowed herself to become too emotionally involved, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. Not when he needed her, not when she needed him too. She walked toward him slowly, her heart pounding. "I'm not leaving you, Jinwoo, but this..." She gestured between them, her voice faltering. "This can't happen. We can't let this happen." He reached for her hand, his grip firm. "It already has." The walls were crumbling around them, and neither of them could stop the inevitable pull. Neither of them could stop what was coming next. The morning after their kiss, everything had shifted. Ada woke up with a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. She had promised herself that she would keep her emotions in check. She was here to do a job, nothing more. But after that kiss, after the rawness and desperation in Jinwoo's touch, she realized just how much she had already crossed the line. The problem was, Jinwoo wasn't the man she thought he was. He wasn't the cold, emotionless Mafia king she had been warned about. No, he was more complicated, broken, tortured, and desperate for a feeling he couldn't explain. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Hyunho, Jinwoo's trusted lieutenant. "Meet Jinwoo at the penthouse. Urgent." Ada took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding him. She had already allowed herself to get too close. The idea of pushing him away now seemed impossible. When Ada arrived, the penthouse was quiet. Jinwoo was standing by the window again, his silhouette framed against the sprawling Seoul skyline. This time, there was no cold detachment in his posture. There was a rawness to him, an openness that made her breath catch in her throat. "Jinwoo?" Ada asked softly, her voice hesitant. She had to maintain some distance. But even as she spoke, she felt her resolve slipping away. He turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with a level of intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Ada," he said, his voice hoarse, "I can't stop thinking about you." Her heart stopped. She had known he was struggling. But hearing the words from his lips made everything more real, more dangerous. "You need to stop." Ada's voice cracked as she spoke. She had to pull herself together. She was professional. She couldn't afford to fall for him. "I can't." Jinwoo's gaze softened, and for a moment she saw a side of him that was human, not the Mafia king who ruled with an iron fist. "I haven't felt anything in years, and now, you're here. You make me feel things I didn't think were possible." Ada took a step back, trying to create some physical distance between them. "This isn't about me, Jinwoo. This is about your condition. You're not yourself right now." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "No, it's not just about that. I can feel things now because of you, and I don't know what to do with it." The vulnerability in his voice, the rawness of his confession hit her harder than she was willing to admit. He wasn't just lost in the haze of desire. He was terrified of the feelings he couldn't control. but that didn't change the fact that she couldn't let this happen. "Jinwoo," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "You're not in a place where you can make these decisions. You're still recovering and you need to focus on your health. I can't be part of this." His eyes darkened, and for a brief moment, Ada saw the cold, calculating Mafia king resurface. "I don't need your pity, Ada. I don't need anyone to fix me." His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension between them like a knife. "I'm not broken." "Then prove it," Ada challenged, her heart pounding in her chest. "Show me that you're not broken. Don't use me to fill the emptiness inside you." She turned to walk away, but before she could make it to the door, Jinwoo's voice stopped her. "Don't walk away from me." His words were low, commanding, but there was something else behind them, something softer, desperate. Ada froze, her fingers gripping the door frame as she took in a shaky breath. She wanted to leave. She wanted to escape the storm of emotion swirling between them. But as always, something in her heart kept her rooted to the spot. She turned to face him, her breath shallow. "What do you want from me, Jinwoo?" He took a step toward her, his eyes filled with a mixture of desire and uncertainty. "I want you to stay." His voice was quieter now, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I want you to help me, not as a nurse, but as someone who cares." Her chest tightened, and for the first time, she let herself acknowledge the truth. She cared about him, but caring about him meant she would lose herself. It meant stepping into a world of danger, manipulation, and destruction, a world she wasn't sure she could survive. She stared at him, torn. She wanted to protect him, but she also wanted to protect herself. "I can't be what you need, Jinwoo." She whispered the words, her heart breaking as she spoke them. "I'm not what you think I am." Jinwoo closed the distance between them, his eyes intense, never leaving hers. "I don't need anything from you except the truth." The days after their confrontation were filled with silent tension. Jinwoo and Ada both tried to maintain the distance they had promised themselves, but it was impossible. Each day brought a new challenge, an unexpected touch, a lingering glance, a moment of shared silence that spoke louder than words ever could. And then, one night, as Ada prepared to leave, she was stopped by a call from Hyunho. "The elders are meeting tomorrow. They're discussing the future of the syndicate. They want answers from Jinwoo. If he can't prove himself..." Ada's heart skipped a beat. "And if he can't," Hyunho's voice was grim, "then Minsok will take over, and Jinwoo will be nothing more than a memory." The weight of the words hit Ada like a punch to the gut. She couldn't let Jinwoo lose everything. Not now. Not when he was finally beginning to feel again. The following day, as the Mafia elders gathered in their cold, sterile meeting room, Ada found herself standing outside the door, torn between the world she had entered and the one she had left behind. She had seen the darkness that surrounded Jinwoo's life, the enemies who waited for any weakness. And now she had to decide where she stood. In the meeting room, Jinwoo stood before the elders, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need to prove myself to anyone," he said, his voice strong. "But I will. I will show you that I am capable." Minsok stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. "We'll see about that, cousin." Meanwhile, in the shadows, Ada paced nervously, her thoughts a whirlwind. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't stand by and watch Jinwoo lose everything. She had already crossed a line, and now she was ready to cross another. The tension in the Kang family compound was suffocating. Ada stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. She had just witnessed Jinwoo the man who had been cold and unreachable for so long, confront the elders of his syndicate. His words had been powerful, but it was clear that Minsok, his ruthless cousin, was waiting for any chance to pull the rug out from under him. The elders had always whispered that Jinwoo's weakness was his inability to produce an heir. But Ada, in a moment of desperation and clarity, had realized that Jinwoo's real weakness wasn't the lack of a successor. It was the vulnerability he had allowed to creep in through her. And she, as much as she hated to admit it, had become the weapon he couldn't afford to lose. Inside the meeting room, Jinwoo was standing tall, his face set in a mask of authority. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, betrayed him. He was on the edge of something. The weight of the elder's judgment was a crushing force, and the silence that followed his words felt like an eternity. Minsok stepped forward, his usual smug expression replaced by something more sinister. "Prove yourself, Jinwoo. You know what's at stake." Minsok's voice was laced with venom. 3 years without an heir. The elders are getting impatient. Jinwoo's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Yoonho, standing at his side, shot a glance toward the door where Ada was waiting. The room was tense, the air thick with political maneuvering and family betrayal. But Ada knew Jinwoo's true battle was with himself. Back in the hallway, Ada waited, unsure whether she should enter or stay out of sight. She had already crossed a line by stepping into this world, and with every moment, the line between patient and woman was blurring, until the two roles seemed indistinguishable. She couldn't deny it any longer. Jinwoo was no longer just a mafia boss in her care. He was a man she had come to care for deeply. And yet, every time she tried to get closer, every time she felt that unspoken pull, something inside her warned her to pull back. Jinwoo's voice broke the silence. "I've never needed the approval of the elders, Minsok, but I will not let you take what's mine." His words were sharp, filled with a coldness that contrasted the vulnerability he had shown Ada. Minsok smirked, clearly relishing the moment. "It's not just yours anymore, cousin. You've forgotten that." The elders, a silent circle of power and influence, exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Finally, Elder Park cleared his throat, his gaze steady on Jinwoo. "We've heard your words, Jinwoo, but now you must prove that you can lead, that you can carry the legacy. You have 3 months. If by then there is no heir, there will be no more debate. The leadership will pass to Minsok." The decision was made. The weight of it crushed Jinwoo's spirit, but he refused to show it. He nodded stiffly, his eyes never leaving the elders. 3 months, that's all I need. As the meeting ended, the elders filed out, leaving Jinwoo and Hyunho alone in the room. Ada stepped forward from the hallway, her presence unannounced. Jinwoo didn't even flinch. He had known she was there. He always knew when she was close. Her eyes met his, and for a moment there was only silence. The room felt too small, too suffocating. 3 months, Ada whispered, her voice tight with the weight of the moment. 3 months, Jinwoo repeated, his voice colder now. "But I don't need to prove anything to them, Ada." Her heart clenched. "Then why did you agree?" Jinwoo's eyes softened just a fraction, but the edge in his voice remained. "Because I won't let Minsok take everything, and because I don't have a choice." Ada stepped closer, her pulse quickening as she did. "You're not doing this for them. You're doing it for yourself." His gaze darkened. "I don't need anyone." The words were meant to be a command, but there was something in them that betrayed his true feelings. He was scared, terrified. He was still fighting against the emptiness inside him. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. They both knew the truth. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and confrontations. Jinwoo's empire was crumbling under the pressure of his enemies, and the elders were tightening their grip, pushing him harder and harder to prove himself. The clock was ticking, and with every passing hour, the weight of his obligations felt more unbearable. But there was Ada, steadfast and quiet, always by his side. She had become a constant, an anchor in his chaotic world, and with her, the desire was becoming something impossible to ignore. It was late one night, as Jinwoo sat in his office, buried in paperwork, that Ada arrived with news. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway before she knocked lightly at his door. "Jinwoo," she said, stepping inside, "we need to talk." He looked up, tired but alert. "What's wrong?" Ada hesitated before she spoke. "I've been thinking about everything, about you and B." She swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "I think it's time we stop pretending." Jinwoo stood from his desk, his heart pounding at the uncertainty in her eyes. Pretending? Pretending that this isn't happening, pretending that we're not already in too deep. She took a step closer, her voice quieter now. "I can't keep pretending I don't care about you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Jinwoo could feel the weight of her confession settle between them. The tension that had been building for so long finally breaking through. His pulse quickened, and he reached for her, pulling her into him. But this time, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't about need or power. It was about them. "Ada," he whispered, his voice raw, "I can't lose you. Not now." She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him pull her closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that was more than just desire. It was a promise. A promise of something real, something they both feared and wanted. The next morning, Jinwoo stood in the doorway to his office, staring out at the city once more. But this time, there was something different in his eyes. He had never allowed himself to need anyone. But now, with Ada in his life, he knew that he was no longer the same man. He couldn't be. And no matter what happened in the next 3 months, he was willing to fight for her. For them. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Min-seok was watching. His cold eyes never missed a detail. He had seen the changes in Jinwoo. And now, with Ada in the picture, he knew that the game had just become much more dangerous. "You think you can take this from me, Jinwoo?" Min-seok muttered, his smirk widening. "I'll make sure you regret ever feeling anything at all." The days that followed were a whirlwind of decisions, consequences, and stolen moments between Jinwoo and Ada. Jinwoo's resolve had hardened. He had never wanted to need anyone, least of all someone like Ada, but he had never been more certain about one thing in his life. He would fight for her. Fight for the woman who had awakened something in him that had long been buried under layers of power, pain, and a poisoned past. Ada, on the other hand, was struggling to reconcile the professional boundaries that had once defined her role with the overwhelming emotions now tangled in her heart. The man she had come to care for, the man she had promised herself she would never get involved with, was the same man who was holding her heart captive. And she didn't know how much longer she could hold on to the walls she had built around herself. That evening, as Jinwoo sat in his office, the weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on him. The elders were pushing for answers, the pressure mounting with each passing day. Min-seok had already made his move, his whispers in the shadows growing louder. Jinwoo stood by the window, staring out at the city, trying to collect his thoughts. The weight of his empire, his family, and the impossible demands of the elders bore down on him. But there was something else in the back of his mind, something he couldn't escape. Ada. He couldn't afford to let his feelings for her cloud his judgment. But every time she touched him, every time she looked at him, He felt as though everything he had built was slipping away. Meanwhile, Ada was pacing in her apartment, her phone in her hand, a text from Hyunho still flashing on the screen. "Jinwoo wants to see you. Urgent!" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen him alone in days, at least not without the looming presence of the Mafia world surrounding them. And every time they were alone, the pull between them became undeniable. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. It was real. But could they both afford to fall this far? When Ada arrived at the penthouse, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Jinwoo was waiting for her in the same place he always was, by the window. The cold, calculated leader she had seen so many times was gone, replaced by a man who was struggling with the weight of his decisions, his emotions, and the future of his family. He didn't speak as she entered. The silence between them was thick, and it felt as though every word had already been spoken without ever leaving their lips. Finally, Jinwoo turned toward her, his face filled with frustration, helplessness, and a desire that mirrored her own. "I can't keep doing this." His voice was hoarse, as if the words pained him. "I can't keep pretending that this is just business, that this is just about the syndicate." Ada's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come. She had known they couldn't keep avoiding the truth. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she said softly, her voice betraying the emotion she had tried to keep hidden. "I've never seen you like this, Jinwoo, and I've never felt this way." The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was nothing but the quiet hum of the city below them, the tension between them palpable. "I don't want to be weak," Jinwoo confessed, his voice breaking. "I've spent so long building this empire, keeping control of everything. But when it comes to you, I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Ada stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch his arm gently. "You're not weak, Jinwoo. You're human." For the first time in weeks, Jinwoo let his guard down, his shoulders slumping as he allowed himself to feel something more than the pressure of his empire. He took a deep breath, his eyes closing for a moment before opening them to look at her. "I've never let anyone in before," he admitted, "and now I don't know if I can live without you." Ada's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he was showing her. She had never imagined she would see this side of him. But it wasn't just Jinwoo's vulnerability that made her heart ache. It was her own. The next day was full of tension. Min-seok had grown bolder, and Jinwoo knew the time was running out. His empire was on the line, his future uncertain, and the weight of the elders' demands pressing down on him. But even as he prepared for the upcoming meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, was pulling him in a direction he wasn't ready for. He had promised himself that he would not let Ada become a distraction. But with every passing day, it became clearer that she wasn't just a distraction. She was everything. Later that evening, Jinwoo called for a private meeting with his closest allies, including Hyunho. The topic was serious. His position as the head of the syndicate was on the line, and it was clear that the elders were preparing to push him out in favor of Min-seok. "I need to know everything." Jinwoo's voice was cold, his mask of control slipping back into place. "Where does Min-seok stand? What's he planning?" Hyunho leaned forward, his face grim. "Min-seok's allies are growing stronger. He's making moves behind your back. It's only a matter of time before he takes control." "And the elders?" Jinwoo asked, his gaze sharp. "They're split, but they're growing impatient. They want results, Jinwoo. They want an heir, a successor, and if you can't deliver, they'll vote in Min-seok." Jinwoo slammed his fist on the table, his anger flaring up. "I will not let that bastard take what's mine." Ada sat in her apartment, her phone buzzing again. She had been expecting the call, but it didn't make the message any easier to bear. "Jinwoo wants you at the meeting. Now." Her heart sank. She knew this wasn't going to be a simple meeting. The stakes had never been higher. She had become a pawn in a game that was bigger than both of them, and she had no idea how far Jinwoo was willing to go to protect her, or himself. The meeting that evening was chaotic, the tension palpable. Min-seok stood at the back of the room, his smug grin never wavering, as Jinwoo walked in, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. "Gentlemen," Jinwoo began, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I will not bow down to you. I will not let Min-seok take my position, and I will not let this empire fall." Min-seok's smile faded slightly, but he didn't flinch. "You've had your chance, Jinwoo. It's over." Jinwoo didn't respond immediately. He knew this would be the fight of his life. "You're right, Min-seok," Jinwoo finally said, his voice low and filled with resolve. "It's over, but not for me, for you." As the meeting continued, Ada stood outside the door, her heart racing. She had no idea what would happen next. She had no idea how this war would end, but she did know one thing. She would never leave Jinwoo, no matter the cost. The air in the Kang compound was thick with anticipation. Jinwoo stood in the middle of the room, his gaze unwavering as he faced down the very people who had once feared him. The stakes had never been higher. His leadership, his empire, and his very life were all on the line. But this time, there was no mask, no facade of coldness. This time, Jinwoo was standing not as the Mafia king, but as a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "Ada." The room was silent as Jinwoo spoke, his voice firm, filled with a calm certainty that surprised even him. "I've spent my entire life fighting for control." His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of each elder, each ally, each enemy. "But I've realized that there are things more important than power." He paused, letting the words sink in. Min-seok, his cousin and rival, stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. But the smirk was fading, replaced by something darker. "You've all tried to control me, to manipulate me," Jinwoo continued, his voice now filled with a quiet fury. "But what you don't understand is that I'm not just some pawn in your game. I've found something, someone that gives me more strength than all of your alliances combined." Ada entered the room, her presence like a silent force that commanded attention. She was calm, confident, her eyes locked on Jinwoo as she walked toward him. The room parted for her, but none of them dared to speak. Jinwoo didn't look away from her. She was here. She was with him. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. "Ada," he said softly, his voice holding an unspoken promise. He turned back to the elders, his tone now final. "This is where it ends. I don't care what you think of me anymore. I don't care about your threats, your politics. You will not take anything from me." Min-seok's face darkened, his eyes narrowing as he stepped forward. "You think she'll save you?" He laughed bitterly. "She's just a nurse, Jinwoo, a weak woman who doesn't belong in this world. You're too far gone to see that." Jinwoo's eyes hardened, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He took a step forward, his voice low but filled with an undeniable power. "I'm not weak, Min-seok. I've been weak. I let you control me. I let you think I was just a puppet." His gaze flickered to Ada. "But I'm done. I've fought for everything in my life, and now I'm fighting for her." The tension in the room was unbearable. Every person present knew that this was more than just a Mafia war. This was about something deeper. It was about loyalty, trust, and love. A love that had slowly, inexorably, crept into Jinwoo's heart and had changed him in ways he couldn't even explain. Min-seok took another step forward, but Jinwoo was ready. Without a word, he moved swiftly, his hand gripping the gun hidden in his jacket. The cold, calculated leader of the syndicate was back, but this time it wasn't just about survival. It was about taking control of his life. Taking control of his fate. Don't! Hyunho stepped forward, his voice sharp. Minsok, this is over. The elders have spoken. It's time to end this. Minsok froze, his eyes flicking to Yunho and then to Jinwoo. The room was silent as the two men locked eyes, the tension palpable. You'll regret this, Minsok spat, his voice seething with venom. You're making a mistake, Jinwoo. You'll lose everything. Jinwoo didn't flinch. He simply lowered his gun, the decision made. He didn't need to prove himself to Minsok anymore. He didn't need to fight for an empire built on lies. He had something more valuable now, something real. I've already lost everything I cared about, Minsok. Jinwoo's voice was steady, but not her, not Ada. The room was still as death, as Minsok's smirk faded entirely. The game was over. The empire would not fall into his hands, but even as the tension dissolved, there was another battle still to be fought, one that couldn't be resolved with a simple victory. Jinwoo turned to Ada, his expression softening. She had stood by him through the chaos, through the confusion, through the growing darkness of his world. Are you ready? He asked her, his voice quieter now, full of raw honesty. Ada's eyes met his, and for the first time she saw the man she had always known was hidden beneath the cold exterior, the man who was capable of so much more than the world had allowed him to be. She saw the man who had allowed himself to feel for her. I'm ready. She took his hand, a silent promise passing between them. Let's leave this behind. Let's build something new. The next day, the papers were filled with the aftermath of the showdown at the Kang compound. Minsok had been taken care of, his attempts to seize power extinguished. Jinwoo's position as the leader of the syndicate was secured, but it was no longer the prize he sought. Jinwoo and Ada left Seoul. The Mafia world, the pressure of the elders, and the shadow of betrayal all stayed behind. They travelled together, far from the world that had once defined them, finding peace in each other's presence. A year later, Jinwoo and Ada stood on the balcony of their new home, no longer in the heart of Seoul, but in a quiet, secluded retreat by the mountains. The Mafia world was behind them, and so was the fear that had once ruled their lives. It's ours now, Jinwoo said softly, his hand resting on Ada's as they gazed out at the horizon. It's ours, she echoed, a smile tugging at her lips. Jinwoo turned to her, his gaze full of love, of warmth, a far cry from the cold, emotionless man who had walked into her life months ago. You saved me, Ada. His voice was filled with sincerity, and for that I will always be grateful. Ada smiled, her heart full as she met his gaze. We saved each other, Jinwoo. The world was still dangerous. There were still battles to be fought, but in that moment, standing beside the man she loved, Ada knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe. The Kang Syndicate continued to thrive, but under a new leadership, a leadership built on loyalty, trust, and love. Jinwoo and Ada forged a path of their own, one that transcended the violence and power struggles of the Mafia world. They had found something far more precious than any empire, a future, together.